One thing I try to do is always explain the why. Because people are a lot smarter than me, and so if they understand the intent or the why, then they can actually do way better than I could ever do.
In vertical SaaS, the idea of hire the buyer is a very good strategy.
We were probably like 70% technology, 30% domain. Part of this is like structurally building into the culture. We are customer centric. We never let our customers down. We beat our numbers. That is absolutely what we do, right? And it becomes part of your identity. I had just hired hundreds of people, and I was like, we don't have as many hitters. Like when there was 100 people, 15 people did a disproportionate amount of the work. They were so phenomenal. And at 500, there's like 30 of them. I added 400 people, and my hit rate is 15 new people that are like disproportionately epic. And I came across a sociological principle called Price's Law. Almost always in vertical SaaS, you are going to need to sell multiple products to these customers. So you have to get really, really good at how you do multi-product, and you have to be really intentional about that. Really, the earlier you can be more intentional, the better.
Behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
It's no secret that AI is revolutionizing the way we work, and the B2B sales landscape is no exception. Meet Upland Altify, a leading provider of AI-enhanced sales solutions designed to help revenue teams work smarter. Large organizations around the world trust Altify to overcome sales challenges and simplify complex processes. This Salesforce-native suite of sales solutions empowers sellers' productivity, streamlines workflows, and uncovers hidden opportunity, all leading to significant revenue growth. Learn how Altify can maximize your Salesforce investment and transform your revenue team. Visit www.uplandsoftware.com/Altify to see Altify in action.
And we are live. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the GTM podcast. You got Scott Barker here as always. Thank you for lending us your eardrums for the next 45 minutes or so. We are going to have a very, very thoughtful discussion today, all around go-to-market, how to scale companies, how to build teams. Going to touch a little bit on vertical SaaS, and I have the perfect guest, one I have really wanted on the pod since we started this thing, years back. I am joined by Dennis Lyandres. Dennis, welcome, man.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Pumped to have you. And how are you holding up today? I hear your new baby was teething last night. Your wife had an important meeting, so you pulled an all-nighter, and not the fun kind that some might be used to.
I had a long night, but very worthwhile. And having a child has really taught me the importance of presence. Like, it's just so easy to appreciate that he's only going to be this a little for such a short amount of time. So it's still a joy just to hold him at 3 a.m, even when you're like, oh, I'm so tired. So I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well, you look alive and sharp. What did you do to get yourself back in the game? I feel like a lot of our listeners can probably relate when they're balancing family life with a heavy exec workload. What's kind of your process when you got to go and do something when you're not in the zone?
I feel like I've probably been ridiculous and just built up a very large set of tools. And then I'm like, which one of these and how can I use them? So I live in Santa Barbara. I'm not too far from the ocean. I find that's magical. I find breath work is really, really powerful, even like the physiological side of just like and a deep exhale. I like mantras. I get a lot from relationships and those around me. So sometimes I'll just like text a close friend, be like, today is a rough day. I'll be like, you got this. And it carries me a lot. Even like 2 minutes of exercise, high intensity exercise, works really well for me. And I say that, by the way, all in the context of like, and then as you go through it, you're like, this is really hard. So I haven't figured out any like silver bullet, but I have found that all the tools that people say are good fundamentals tend to work. It's just trying to figure out which, when, and how you can use them.
Totally. Yeah. It's about acquiring more and more tools as we go. Huge fan of breathwork as well. I try and do breathwork every day, and my friends actually do a great retreat that I try and get over at least every couple of weeks, where you do like a full like 90-minute session, which is super intense. You kind of like go to another universe after 90 minutes of breath work.
I try to do like 30, 45-minute sessions at least once or twice a week, like a mix of meditation and the kind of Wim Hof holotropic breathing. And it is just, I'm so with you. I've sort of come to find that you can almost apply breath work to any situation. So whether it's a situation where you're trying to get yourself more amped up, and in that world, your exhalations are shorter and your inhales are longer, versus like breath work for bedtime, breath work to settle down after a workout. So I found it to be like one of those magical things.
Totally. I actually found this app recently called Open that I've been using. That's a great app. They're just like short, like 10-minute. They do a breath work, a meditation, and then like a movement. And it's like, it's for those days when I'm just like, I'm not feeling it, but like, yes, I can do this little thing. Well, I love that. Well, we could have maybe like a human optimization podcast another day, but we'll try and stick to go to market as much as we can. So quickly for the listeners, want to do a bio, because man, you've had just such an incredible career. So Dennis is currently an advisor at ICONIQ Capital. Of course, everyone's heard of ICONIQ, one of the most respected names in the VC landscape. But before that, Dennis spent 8.5 years with Procore. During that time at Procore, grew from 10 million to over 900 million in revenue, and went public on the New York Stock Exchange. And Dennis started as an EVP of sales back in 2014, before moving to the CRO function in 2018. And he was responsible for it all. So, driving revenue across all customer-facing functions, including sales, marketing, CS, RevOps, business development, and previous to Procore, held various sales and sales management roles at Cloudera, Pentaho, and then I understand you actually began your career in M&A with BTI Group, which I found interesting.
Yeah, so don't hold that against me. I've crossed from the dark side to the light side. My thing is, founders and being great to them and their people and their customers. But I did start out in finance. Yeah,
I love it. I love it. I mean, there's so much I want to dive into, and I also would be remiss if I didn't, just thank you for being such a big part of GTM Fund from really the early days. And I think oftentimes when we talk about these incredible executives we have in our network, we talk about them as almost nodes that can help us in all different parts of the venture life cycle, whether that's sourcing or diligence or support. But I got to say, I think your impact, I'm trying to think of what an upgraded node is, but like it feels like you have a separate one. Maybe it's a planet. We'll go with a planet in the ecosystem. So thank you for that. And it has been really crucial in one, I think our better understanding of vertical SaaS, obviously Procore being the shining example of that, and how best to support them, because it is a different, go-to-market motion completely. And we'll touch on that a little bit. But I also wanted to just share a personal observation after recording more than, I think we're at like 120 of these episodes. And this is, I think, good for the listeners, just as like a reminder. The most successful and busiest people who come on the pod, they always do two things. They ask way more questions, and they're always way more prepared, which feels counterintuitive. You'd think they'd be like, yeah, I've done all this stuff. I've got a lot going on. Sure, I'll come on and, talk about some stuff, but that's never the case. And I personally love it. It makes my job much more enjoyable. But I guess it does make sense if you think the adage of, how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think the top operators have this kind of sickness that drives them to do everything to the very best of their ability. So why don't we start there? So I lovingly refer to it as the sickness. And to me, that's this idea that nothing is ever, I guess, good enough, or everything can be improved constantly. And most importantly, ourselves. Do you resonate with that? And have you kind of always had that level of drive?
I've had that level of drive, I think, in my adult life for sure. I think I was a little bit of a muckety muck as a kid, and I didn't quite appreciate all the privilege and opportunity I had. Yeah, I think I have always had that drive, but it's probably only been last 5, 7 years that my relationship to that drive has been different. And what I mean by that is like, if I look back like 6 years ago, I just like everything was like, you're terrible. You didn't do this. You couldn't land that. Like this didn't go well. Like, oh my gosh. And it was, I don't know how healthy it was, honestly. And I've changed my reframing, because I used to be like cringe at my leadership from 3 months ago. And I do these postmortems on myself and they were brutal. And I was like, I didn't do this well. And like, I didn't land that and all these things. And I've since come to be like, I could only be so lucky that 3 months from now, I cringe in a joyful way around what I wasn't doing then that I'm doing better now. And I've kind of tried to take a be happy, but it's okay not to be satisfied. Better, never best, but be at peace with who you are and what you have for today. And that has helped me a lot. So I would say in my adult life, I have always had that drive, but really only recently do I think that I've found a way to make it much more healthier internally in my own ridiculous head.
Yeah. I think that's a great call out. And I think that's a transition we all have to make. If you are fortunate or unfortunate enough to have the sickness, is I think at the beginning of our careers and lives, that's often fueled, as you kind of expressed, in like fear. It's like very like ego based, and you're very hard on yourself. And that's a hell of a driver in the early days. Like
Totally,
that
totally,
it
yeah.
works. But to find any peace or balance in your life, you have to like switch that fuel to, call it passion, call it love. Like you need a different set of fuel to drive that sickness. And I think that's what allows longevity in a career, and why people, don't burn out. 8.5 years, that's a long time to be, going full steam at Procore. But let's get right into it, man. Like, I want to fly you back to your time at Procore, early days. You have just scaled your organization to 500 people. On the outside, Procore is rocking. People are excited, but you are kind of feeling like a failure. Why?
Well, I think just to call it out, right? I think one of the things we were talking about was this story I had around, having scaled from like 100 to 500 people, and basically having a meltdown and being like, oh my gosh, I am like the absolute worst leader ever. And I remember calling like, I think it was every single mentor I had. I was like 4 or 5 just really close mentors. And these are like the greats of the greats. I'm so fortunate to have them, helping me. And I was like, I'm the worst. And their first thing, by the way, was like, hey, remember we talked about like your relationship to yourself? Like, doesn't sound like it's going very well right now. And I was like, that's not the point. And then they were like, when was the last time you had a day off or a full night of sleep? Like, that's also not the point. And the thing, right, as we were doing kind of like 100 to 500 was, look, I think people are like the source of so much joy and meaning. They're also the thing that drive your ability to win in a high growth organization. And I had felt like I had just hired hundreds of people. I had put so much care into the hiring process, into vetting, into onboarding them really well. And I was like, we don't have as many hitters. Like when there was 100 people, there's like 15 people that, did a disproportionate amount of the work. They were so phenomenal. Like they were the people, right? And at 500, I was like, there's like 30 of them. I had 400 people and my hit rate is, 15 new people that are like disproportionately epic. And what was fascinating for me, and I found this to be like a thing that gives me a lot of conviction in my learning journey, is like when I can call 4 or 5 of the greats, and by the way, these days you can just listen to them on the Go to Market podcast, right? So you don't have to call them, because I think we say our honest truth on these podcasts. And they all say the same thing. And they're like, are you serious right now? Like, this is actually very normal. And I'm like, it can't be normal. You're not listening to me. And they're like, no, I'm listening. Let me echo it back. You hired 400 people. There were, 15 people at 100 that were doing a bunch of the work. And now you got, 30 or 40. And all of them were like, that's actually really normal. And so I started like nerding out, and I've always liked kind of psychology and sociology and some of those things. And I came across a sociological principle that I think as we were talking, I haven't really seen a lot in kind of the venture or Silicon Valley or kind of go-to-market communities called Price's Law. And Price's Law essentially says that the square root of the number of employees in the company do about half the work. So that means if you have 400 people, there's 20 people that do a disproportionate amount of the work. And I've come to find that even as I'm advising to be more and more true. And I think the actionable thing that, I would say maybe we can spend a minute talking about is like, if you believe that it's even directionally correct, this notion of Price's Law, then what are the programs that you build to get the most out of these people and to truthfully to ensure you never lose them? So I'll just pause there. I feel like I've been talking a lot.
No, so this is when we were having some discussions leading up to this podcast, I felt understood or seen or not crazy when you told me about Price's Law, and have since gone down my own rabbit hole checking it out, because you can't help but notice it. Every single organization I have been a part of, every sports team I have been a part of, all you have to do is cook dinner with a big group of friends. 15 of you are in the kitchen. There's like one or two people that are actually moving the needle on getting this bolognese, completed. And, I saw it at Outreach, and I was just in awe of some of these people, regardless of role. They could have been an IC, they could have been an engineer, they could have been running a whole team. It's just like, wow, this person is everywhere. Like, they're doing their job function, but how do they also understand like the product roadmap better than some of our product people? And they just like had all of this knowledge and understanding. They always knew who to go to get something done. And I thought it was just like, we weren't supposed to say that stuff out loud. So I'm happy you're saying it out loud, and not only saying it out loud, but also have been very intentional with that understanding, impacting and shifting how you build teams and the advice that you give companies. So let's get into some frameworks. If we believe that to be true, how do we set up our companies better?
Yeah, I've both seen this in companies I'm advising where I've just bonded joyfully with the CEOs over it. And I'm also bringing it to companies that I'm working on. It's essentially a version of what we did at Procore, with an understanding of like top talent is just so disproportionately valuable. And people kind of do when you say it that way. They're like, oh, yeah, no, I get it. Like a small number of engineers are uniquely epic and meaningful and valuable. A small number of salespeople put out a disproportionate amount of revenue and strategic to everything else. And so the way I think that you can kind of operationalize this or codify it or turn it into a playbook, whatever kind of, Silicon Valley jargon word I'm supposed to use for that, is look, first, be really great at identifying those folks. And there's lots of ways. I think people usually know who they are. I think you figure out who they are. Then I think you spend a lot of time making sure it's just not like a recency bias or a familiarity bias. But once you identify those folks, I think you want to make sure you never lose them. And I think you want to maximize their business value. And truthfully, like, you want them to be happy. So you care about these people. And I think that there are a handful of things that you can do, which is like, one, the connection to leadership, right? So the CEO, the executive team, and I think even cross-pollinating it. So take your best salespeople and make sure they have a great relationship with CTO, right? And that would be one, connection to leadership. Two, I think selfishly, and also because it aligns interests, like these people love solving the hardest problems in the company. And so I think you give them stuff, they're like, I don't know if we could take this new product to this new market because we're doing, new product and new market. That's really hard. You all are going to work together on that. And so building relationships across these kind of Price's Law individuals is really, really powerful. And then there's the obvious, right? Like make sure they have great career growth, make sure that their holding power or their compensation is disproportionately epic, right? So this is where you're like, you don't need to be in the bands, right? What you really need to do is just make sure that even if someone wanted to poach this talent, they would just be like, look, not only do I have a connection to leadership, I'm working with the very best people on the coolest, hardest stuff. I'm learning, I have career growth, but you wouldn't be able to afford me, And I think like that is a program that you really can build, be intentional. The thing I haven't figured out, because I've seen different versions of this, is how much of this is like an advertised program where you're really clear on how you get in versus how much of this is like, hey, we have this thing, but it's, the CEO and they get together with these people and they do their work. And, sometimes you need them as a change agent and you don't want people to know you have a mole and you're leveraging the grapevine as a, communication vehicle to understand like what's going on in the field. So that part I haven't figured out on should this program be discrete or not. But what I do have a lot of conviction in is even if it's not half the work done by the square root, it's a small number of people doing a lot of the work that really, really matter. And their connection to leadership, putting them on the hardest projects and making sure that their opportunity from comp and career is really great is a really good thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever get HR pushback for a program like this? I think we've gotten obsessed with the idea of fairness and, hey, their role is the same as my role, so why is their band or comp different? Why are they getting access when I don't have access? And it's kind of a funny thing because if Price's Law is true, the output is not fair. The outcomes are not fair. These small select are driving. So why are we trying to make it fair? Was there any pushback you had with HR or people teams?
Yeah, though I find like there's a lot you can learn from the people team and their perspective on this. And so one thing that I think is really good in these kinds of programs is um, how do you make sure you have the right people? And how can you give folks that are newer to the organization or folks who may not have had the same access opportunity? And so I think that's a very fair concern. And I think that part of this program should have kind of safety mechanisms to address it. I think truthfully, the other side of it is like, I think you make exceptions for exceptional people. And I think that is a philosophical discussion that you hopefully have with your HR partner and you land somewhere and you make a decision. That is my perspective. That when you get people who are this exceptional and they produce this much value and they're this disproportionately meaningful to the success of the company, that you should reward and recognize them in that way. And in which case, some of the traditional like banding or some of the like, you can't do that for this employee because you can't do it for the others, I don't fully agree with. I think you do what makes sense for the relationship and the business, but I do think you need to be very mindful about how you ensure you have the right people in this program and how you're giving people opportunity to rise to a level of greatness. And I'll throw you a curveball. I have a different, kind of more nerdy academic reflection on like, is it structural? Like, is there something that prevents more than, the square root of the number of employees in the company from adding more value? Is it like, to use your kitchen analogy, is there just not enough room in the kitchen, or like we didn't create enough utensils? Like, meaning, is the situation more powerful than the people? And is there something about how teams and organizations form where there's just not enough room? And then if that's the case, why and what do we do? But that I think is an esoteric for another day sort of rabbit hole I'm going down. Ask me in like a year.
Well, it's an interesting thought experiment. And my head's going back to my dinner example. And I have a dear friend named Jenna who's the best. But Jenna's always going to be that in that kitchen. And it's probably hindering some of the other people from contributing as much as they could because Jen's phenomenal and everyone knows she's got it. Right. So I think that is interesting. It might be a factor of, well, they've got it, so I don't need to shine as brightly.
Well, yeah, like there may not just be growth available because there isn't room where they've got it. And so things that, I tried to make sure to do really, really well was like, how can I carve out areas where a new crop of folks could rise and show they're exceptional? How do I bring to bear the perspective of someone's situation so that I can understand if they're truly crushing it within the situation? Like, simple example, like, here are some crap leads and they convert these so disproportionately well. Like, that must be a very talented person, because you do get the opposite kind of reinforcing bias where you just give the most important work to the people who typically do the best with it. And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so I have within my own leadership career tried to spend a lot of time to make sure that I'm not doing that. And I think it has resulted in a greater density of talent with more people being able to do more epic things. And if I was just like, look, these are people, they always get it done. Don't fix what ain't broken. Like, I want to keep working with these people.
Yeah. And we will move on from this, but I think this is really, really important. And it feels really important to me for, startup all the way up to, really large companies. So I'm going to try and make this as actionable as possible. So if I'm a founder, I'm listening to this right now, or I'm a revenue leader and I'm listening to this right now, is there a number of employees where you should start thinking about building a program like this? Do you think you can build it right away? Should you build it from kind of the ground up? And yeah, would love your thoughts on how we take this and put it into our organizations.
I think there are some things that culturally you just set from day one. So, like a culture of being great at identifying talent, cultivating it, and just seeing how much of people's excellence and potential you can capture is probably a day zero, day one thing. Having more scale structure to this program and kind of some of the ways that I'm describing, that's probably a fair question. I'd probably say, if you're a department of 100 people, that definitely makes sense. It depends at what level. We did this sort of at a company level and at a organizational level. So we had folks company wide who were kind of engaging with the CEO, solving hardest problems, had relationships with each other. We also had it within, the go-to-market teams. And I would say at a company wide level, probably 100 employees. Probably. I'd actually love to ask you. What do you think?
I don't think at the very early days you have to, because I think in the very early days they should all be, we'll call them price qualified people. I think that's what we
Yeah.
we lose over time as we add new people. So hopefully up until 15, 20 folks, they're all should be that's the benchmark for anyone. But then as you scale, I think unfortunately the bar to get in, because you need people and you need to scale, goes down. So I think the 100 mark seems about right to me.
Why don't we pin it for that? And one thing I love about y'all is if we find out that was wrong, we'll just own it, we'll change it. But I think north of 100 employees or north of a department of 100, I think this is a program that makes sense for a lot of folks.
Totally. Yeah. And then again, once identified, make sure they are connected to leadership. They can get right to the C-suite at any point. They're connected to each other. It could be a monthly offsite. It could be a weekly call, whatever that be.
Slack channel. Yep.
Yeah. And then comp, equity, bans don't apply. You pay them whatever they need to get paid to stay and not get headhunted.
Could I add just one more? Because I'd
yeah,
like,
of course.
And they solve the hardest problems in the company over and over again. And so as you think about like doing things that you're like, this is as close to mission impossible as can be, those are the people that you task to do those things.
Yeah. And a quick pause to hear from our friends at Vanta. We've all been there. Your deal is almost closed, and all that's left is the security review. But when it comes to those lengthy security questionnaires, the endless back and forth between you, your security team, and the customer can often cause deals to stall out, leaving your deal at risk and dollars on the table. With Vanta questionnaire automation, go-to-market teams can complete security reviews up to 5 times faster, helping you close deals in less time than ever. Over 8,000 global companies like ZoomInfo, Smart Recruiters, and Noibu use Vanta to streamline security questionnaires and close deals faster. Visit vanta.com/GTM now to learn more about questionnaire automation. That's VANTA.com/GTMNOW. Now, back to the episode. So it draws a lot of parallels to a principle that people might be more familiar with, which is the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. States roughly 80% of outcomes come from, 20% of causes. In our world, a lot of that means, 20% of your customers are going to drive, 80% of the revenue in one way or another. That could be like true ARR, or they're going to be referring, and they're going to be these incredible like bastions of your brand. And I love how you've taken both those principles and also applied them to the customer. And I know customer was really at the core of everything that you did at Procore, and that sounds a little bit trite almost. It's easy to say, harder to execute. But what does that mean? Like when you're thinking of building out account plans, you're thinking about, there's just so much you can do to grow revenue. But you always give this advice that, start with the customer.
Yeah. Um, and look, I think one thing I try to do is always explain the why, because people are a lot smarter than me. And so if they understand the intent or the why, then they can actually do way better than I could ever do with it. And I think with customer, like what I'm finding almost universally across the companies that I advise is I go in there and I'm like, hey, let's look at the priorities. It's really hard to execute in a growth company, like so many things. How do we make sure we're doing the most important things to drive the most important outcome, right? Which is revenue. Um, and I would love to see more clarity that it's like, hey, customer's the thing. And so, like, in terms of why on customer, every time I run through it with folks, they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I'm like, cool. Now let's go do it. So, in terms of the why, to me, I think it's like, it's the fastest, most predictable dollar you're going to get. It is so much easier to spend more money to acquire a new logo, to invest in R&D if your customer lifetime value metrics are high, right? I think people sometimes underweight how much customer can drive employee engagement. And so these programs where you connect engineers directly to customers, by the way, customers love this, right? And it becomes a unifying force for the whole company that's like positive, right? It's like, hey, like we're all going to rally around the customer because serving them is what brings our mission to life. It's what lets us impact the world. And then, like I just think brand matters, and I think like good luck having a great brand if your customers aren't awesome. And then there's the like you get your next customer from the last happy, successful one. And so to me, like those whys on customer can't be understated, like overstated enough. And then, I think in terms of the how, you sort of said quite a bit of it there, right? I think it's the same, like getting teams to work together to achieve outcomes is really valuable, right? And customer is something you can rally everyone around and then get them to work together. And what I find is like execution is so important, right? Like it's sort of that notion of like, look, the strategy or being in the right market at the right time isn't the thing that ultimately determines if you win, right? It's people and their ability to execute. And so with customer, where I'm guiding folks like in terms of the how is like chunk this out, right? And so it's like, hey, how well can we know two customers really, really well? And how fast can we get the account plans against those customers? And how well can we then, drive and execute? Hey, we all want to do like handoffs from SDR to AE, right? Or from, product into a sales-led motion, right? So kind of PLG translating to sales motion. But if we can't even do customer well and do the 10, 20, 50 new customers we closed, like how are we going to take new folks that we don't have as much visibility and information on and do it with even larger numbers? Right. And so I think in terms of like how to do the customer, I think Pareto principle is a great application there, right? So find the 20% of customers you think will disproportionately create the 80% of upsell. And even if it's not exactly that, it's still directionally valuable, right? And then these time to value metrics. The thing that I'm finding kind of like across the board is like, hey, have we done these couple of things really well? And the first is kind of customer health. So like, do we have good usage and visibility into value realization for customers? And again, same sentiment, like, hey, if we can't even confirm our customers who use our software got a ton of value, then how am I going to sell hypothetical value to a prospect? And it's really hard, actually. Like a lot of go-to-market leaders don't quite empathize with product and like how freaking hard it is to get really good usage data you can stand behind. And that's the first reason customers churn, right? So you just didn't get adopted. And so I think that's one really big pillar of like customer excellence or customer 360 is like usage adoption, which then gives you the opportunity to do value realization. The other is engagement, right? And that's people engaging from your company with the customer. And that is, hey, do we understand who the champion is, who the economic buyer, like who the technical users are? And do we have a really good strategy for engaging all these folks? And again, similar concept, like, hey, we need to do this in new logo. If you're selling enterprise, you're selling to complex organizations, resistant or difficult to drive change. And it takes a lot of stakeholders coming together on both sides to drive an outcome, which is, buying this technology and getting a lot of value out of it. And so that kind of engagement visibility, right? And look, I mean, you worked at Outreach. I've ran Outreach at Procore. Like, there's a beautiful tool when people are like, oh, well, how do I actually do that? I was like, well, Outreach is server-side logging of communication, right? And so that I think is a second pillar of like customer excellence, right? One being the kind of customer health through usage and value realization. The second being the people side on like the engagement. And then the third one is kind of, like, how do we know our customer better than even they could know themselves? And that involves bringing external data, so kind of market intent signal data, right? So that you have this complete view of the customer internally and externally. And those, I think, are like, hey, let's get really, really great at doing that for our customers. And it'll be really valuable. So that's kind of my thing on customer.
It's great. And I mean, I saw this again firsthand at Outreach. I remember we did this exercise because we kind of got obsessed with, okay, customer. And we had, all of our growth AEs and CSMs put together. I think they all had to put together like 25 account plans each. But then they would, we had this like big deal and customer review meeting with a bunch of execs, almost like our own T25 kind of group that would, and then they would all present on one. And lo and behold, the only ones that actually the needle moved were the one that was presented, because now there's this connectivity across the whole organization. VP of CS knows it. This engineer who's working on this feature of the roadmap they care about now knows about it. And I can't imagine the time spent on the other 24, account plans that just didn't go anywhere. So I think, how did you think about, because you can't do it for everyone. So one, like, how do you prioritize? Like, what is that exercise? And then two, what is the best way to rally folks that have goals outside of maybe upselling this customer?
Can you give me a little more color on the second part of the question on rallying folks who have goals outside of the customer?
Yeah, so getting people's attention. Let's say it's the VP of engineering, and they've got 3 things that they need to ship, and now they need to now make this a priority, or maybe marketing is working on some demand gen campaign that's really working, and now we need them to shift gears a little bit, create kind of like a rallying cry across the organization.
Look, it's stereotypical, so I'll just reinforce all the stereotypes, but I am a revenue solves all problems, team fails, we all fail, like, got to work towards the greater mission above all else. And I think you want to hire to that, you want to promote to that. And so part of this is like structurally building the culture of like, we are customer centric, we never let our customers down. Like, we beat our numbers. That is absolutely what we do, right? And it becomes part of your identity. And so I think part of it is like making sure that that's in your culture, really, from how you hire, how you fire, how you promote. The other sometimes just relationships, like, hey, we really need you, like, can you help? I also do like pushing the work down. And so if you look at that kind of like, 400 employees, top 25 program, right? The Price is Law folks. Then, those aren't all executives, right? That's actually the exact opposite, right? These are people closest to the problems doing the work. And sometimes you can deflect things down to them, right? And, sometimes you have to reduce scope or eliminate or delegate other things so that you can make room for folks to be able to do these things. So I also think that is an honest exercise you have to go through if people are like, hey, like, Dennis, there's literally 0 chance that I can help with this, customer. The other on prioritization, one, I find it really hard. I have had to change my leadership style a lot. I used to be all about like, get to yes in every meeting. How can I leave this meeting? Like, making sure this person feels like I'm going to support what they want to do. And I love their idea, and like, we're going to make it happen. And I still think that's beautiful. Like, I think there's a lot of reasons why that's awesome. But I've come to appreciate, like, the more senior of an executive you get, and the more scaled out your organization gets, at both extremes, like really scaled out org and really small org, your issue is too much opportunity. It's not too little. And so how you actually prioritize and protect the yes becomes one of the most important things you can do as an executive. Like, truthfully, I've almost come to say a P-brain definition of strategy is it's what you say yes or no to. And it's then how you go and protect that yes. The other side of, I think, the question you were asking around prioritization is like, how do you actually increase the rate of digestion so that you can take more stuff on? And that I've tried to spend a lot of time, especially like as I've been advising more companies, I've had this joy of like, okay, what things were really unique to Procore versus which ones are like sort of applicable everywhere. And how you drive great execution is more applicable everywhere than it was like anything like, oh, only Procore did these unique things specific to Procore and its culture to drive execution. And some of those hallmarks are like, one, you have to have clear priorities. And I'm even a fan of like, you can't have a top 10 list that isn't prioritized. What's number one? What's number two? What's number three? Right? Not here's our top 10. They're all equally important. Like maybe you can do that with 3 things. You definitely can't do it with 10. And since I struggle with prioritization, I always have 10, right? Or more than. And I think then like how you chunk it out. And so like I'm really big on this kind of concept of like, can we show people what great looks like and drive time to value as fast as possible? So I don't want 50 account plans. I want to see how fast we can get 2 that are freaking awesome. And, you know, to my comment on like getting teams to work together, I want the brilliance and excellence of the whole team to get these 2 to be great. And can we do that by next week? Because as soon as you start getting into like, hey, we got to go through all the customers and we got to go like figure out like all these things and we got to get like the usage data on all of them. And then we got to get the engagement data. And then the ridiculous guy wants like intent, market, and signal data. You're like, whoa. Can we find like 5 customers that we think are directionally accurate for being these highest propensity to expand customers? Cool. Okay, we can do that by like tomorrow. Cool. Let's have a 10-minute stand-up tomorrow and actually keep it to 10 minutes. And let's confirm we feel these are good enough. If they're not good enough, we'll learn criteria for which ones are better and we'll meet the next day. Cool. Now we got just that next step, kind of next step, last step, identify. Great. Now can we get account plans? And you know what? If they're only 50% as good, it only shows the 3 most important people on the technical and the commercial and the executive side for the engagement. That's awesome. If we can only really confirm they're using our most important product in one part of the business and it's going really well, and here's kind of what the value is, that's phenomenal, right? And let's do a web search and Gemini and Chat GPT and let's see what's happening on the internet for them and LinkedIn. That's great. And so I think that concept of like keep chunking things out smaller and smaller and compress the cycles so that you're like, cool, let's just talk about this 10 minutes every day. Again, you can't do this on 20 items. You can do this on like 1 or 2 items. And that way you can also increase the throughput. Does that answer your question?
It does. Absolutely. Yeah. We're going to take a quick pause from this interview to talk about hiring. Hiring for startups is really hard. You are battling the attention of smart, driven people being bombarded with a ton of opportunities. Plus, it can be time consuming going through all the candidates and challenging to know who is the best fit. Should you hire the person who's been there, done that? The up and comer stepping into the bigger role for the first time? Is stage fit or domain expertise more important for this particular role? Most recruiting firms fill an order. For us, we highly recommend IPS. They are just a different breed of search firm. They've dug into your business to understand its current state and the future vision and are relentless in their pursuit of finding the very best leaders, salespeople, marketers, engineering talent that you need. Integrity Power Search has placed over 2,000 candidates for early to mid-stage startups in its 12-year history, with specialists that focus by function, leveling from mid-level ICs all the way up to the C-level. All right, so with a very senior team, I've met them all. They're pretty rad, including past startup operators. You know, they've seen firsthand the change of trajectory your company can take when you are intentional and aggressive about bringing the right people at the right time. So whether you want advice, have one hard to fill role, or you have a full team build out, we can't recommend IPS enough. Visit Integrity Power Search. That's www.integritypowersearch.com to learn more or connect with them on your next search. And I got to just highlight, I actually love that quote of strategy is simply what you say yes or no to, and you know how fiercely you protect that yes. I really like that quote, and it's a good way to think about things. So we've got the customer at the core. I want to shift a little bit to specifically vertical software. It is definitely, from an investor lens, having a moment right now, probably has been for the last couple of years. In any vertical SaaS conversation, Procore gets mentioned as kind of the shining example. And I know you're working with a lot of great vertical SaaS companies right now. And, beyond what we've talked about, are there sort of, call them different go-to-market pillars that are different from traditional software than they are for vertical?
Yes. Though I would say more of it is just like being exceptional that applies to horizontal too, but you have far less margin and room to mess up in vertical. And then I think there is some stuff that is like, nah, this is like really vertical specific. So, one of the ones that I think is universal, but really, really matters to vertical software is customer. Right. And I think in addition to all the reasons that we discussed earlier in the conversation around customer, I think almost always in vertical SaaS, you are going to need to sell multiple products to these customers. And fintech is a beautiful example where you're selling add-on products that drive a lot of margin and stickiness, and where the ability to deliver those solutions because of Stripe and modern treasury is a lot easier. And so customer, because of the nature of multi-product, the other thing that I think is really important around customer and vertical software is you're almost always selling to more folks in the ecosystem or throughout the value chain, right? So Procore did this. We sold to our customers, right? And those are owners. So think like not real estate. We do real estate developers, but we also do, Fortune 100 companies that build data centers, corporate campuses, retail stores, et cetera. And so in vertical software and customer, you're almost always selling a lot of products to the same customer, right? So you have to get really, really good at how you do multi-product, and you have to be really intentional about that. Really, the earlier you can be more intentional, the better. I'm happy to share like some of the stuff Procore or other companies I see doing on that. And then you end up selling to like the ecosystem, right? That value chain, customer's customer being one example, customer's supplier being another. The one that I've probably had the most passion being like, I want to try it this way, that worked for us at Procore, that's working for I'm trying to find an exception, it's working for every single vertical SaaS company I advise. And I'd love your reaction because you all have a phenomenal vertical SaaS profile, like portfolio, right? With Document Crunch and Offsite. I know we're working on one or two together that we're kind of fired up about. But is this notion of like go hyperlocal by geo and target all your resources against that geography. And part of this is like connecting to what we were talking about earlier, which is like, it's so hard to prioritize and execute and get teams to work together. And that's where the magic of winning happens, right? It's like one team, one dream. And so I think like geo-based, and people are like, geo-based, oh cool, I'm going to go after like New York and Texas. I'm like, I would much rather talk about Manhattan and Houston, right? I don't like tests of one. And I do think that like, you have to have enough so that there's like some, I was going to say meat on the bone, but that's probably not the best phrase to say. So I don't know if there's a different one, but there's not enough there if you go too narrow. But in general, overshoot it to go too narrow. Point all your resources, so marketing, BD, sales dev, sales reps, reference customers, because social selling and social proof is so important, and like really, really win in those geos. And then go on and do more geos. And it's painful, right? You're like sitting presenting to the board and you're like, so we're doing Houston and Manhattan. They're like, we have a global opportunity. And you're like, I know. I'm still going to be opportunistic. I still have people covering all these areas. But we're going to do absolutely exceptional work in customer and in these two geos. And what we're hopefully going to do is win in these geos very well and then use that to keep going on in the next geo. So I think that like hyperlocal is really, really important. And then, I think the other thing I see in vertical SaaS that I think you just have very little room on is how you train and develop, specifically on product and industry. Because I just don't think you have the luxury, right? Procore, when I joined in 2014, like vertical SaaS was kind of like not that fondly thought of, right? Like I left Cloudera and people were like, that like you couldn't have made a worse decision, right? You left like the hottest big data company in Silicon Valley, which is what it was at the time, or close to it, to sell construction software. Like, hello. Now, gosh, almost every single vertical software company I'm advising has multiple vertical software competitors, right? And so in that regard, like you just don't have the luxury to show up and not know your industry and product. And then you're almost always in vertical software going to be hiring a mix of people who come from the vertical or the domain, right? So if it's healthcare, they're coming out of healthcare. But you're also hiring people who are like just exceptional at hypergrowth and technology. And so that means by definition, like no one person has the full set of knowledge that you need. And so I think training and development is the other. So I think like how you do customer, how you do multi-product, how you extend throughout the ecosystem or the value chain to sell to more stakeholders in vertical SaaS is really important. And then I think training and development, especially on industry and products, really important.
Lots to dive into there. The first one is the training and development piece. I think in vertical SaaS, the idea of what do you call it? Hire the buyer is a very very good strategy. Do you have like a rough percentage breakdown? Because you do need both. You can't just over optimize for folks that have domain expertise. Was there a breakdown, or like did you try and manage teams of like, okay, we want 30% to come from this specific industry, but then the rest we need, or was it kind of case by case?
Such a good question. In general, I default to 50-50. I'm like, round numbers. I do bias towards just getting people who are hungry and seem like they have infinite potential. And for us, that did mean we were hiring a lot more out of the technology industry than the construction industry. Because we felt like, it was a place that just attracted the very best talent in the world. Construction also attracts incredible talent, but like we can't go poach from our customers. And so it was harder to like find those folks. I would say two thoughts. We were probably like 70-30, 70% technology, 30% domain. It did also vary by group. So in sales engineering or product marketing, we were heavier skewed towards industry. In enterprise sales, where you're selling to, Fortune 10 companies, we were skewed more towards technology. The other thing is we also evolved it a lot based on need as the company continued to inflect. So, as you're early in a new international market, we would bias more towards industry and kind of product expertise, right? Versus like more, hey, we know the play, let's run and scale, and let's just get great tech folks. And so I would say that it did change based on the stage or the maturity of where we were selling and what we were selling, but 70-30 is probably a good rule.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it would also make sense that would differ by role. And to give some life to your example too of getting hyper local with your go-to-market efforts in vertical SaaS. I literally had a conversation yesterday that if it was a horizontal like SaaS play, I would have been like, can't believe you're telling me this is like one of your pillars of your go-to-market strategy. But they are a workflow automation for customs clearance, right? And
cool.
they're like, we're going to take out a bunch of billboards on everywhere that there's like a port, and there's all these ports that like aren't in major cities and things that like we can get them for super cheap, and we're going to be everywhere. And I'm like, that's brilliant, right? That's like showing up where your buyer actually is. Did that mean for you at Procore huge field team? Like, did you have field reps in like all sorts of places that you probably wouldn't have reps in a typical software company?
Yes. So like I'm quite familiar with areas like Birmingham, Alabama, that some of my counterparts in the go-to-market world who sell like to, just blue chip Fortune 500 are like, by the way, I love Birmingham, like wonderful people, such a great place. So it does, and I love your question because one thing that I should have been more clear on is like when I talk about these geos, I don't think it's just field reps, right? It's field marketing, it's the entire executive team, it's partnerships building with the local trade associations, because these SMB markets do often cluster based on geographies, right? And so construction and the associations and the way that you like everything they're doing is so different in New York than it is in Birmingham, right? And so I think, yes, on the field reps and hyperlocal resources, but I think in addition to that, it's really the whole company having a commitment to these geographies. And again, the name of the game is like, how fast can we win in this market, right? And be absolutely exceptional so that truthfully, we can use that to get us to the next market.
Yeah. The close knit, both by geo and just by job function, is always amazing to me in vertical. I also was having another conversation, and the founder told me that there's this very specific WhatsApp group for this niche role that you would never think. And they're like, if why we need to be excellent is if there is one WhatsApp in this group of 130 people, those are the 130, that's our whole TAM and we're fucked.
Yeah. I think this is where
Yeah.
like brand and vertical SaaS, you just have to be so much better because truthfully, you can't kind of like muck it up really bad and then be like, I didn't do so good in telco, but don't worry, I got retail. It's like, you don't. No, this is your thing. And I think I'd love your thoughts on this, but I think this is actually like codifiable and consistent across vertical SaaS instead of unique and exceptions is like, hey, do you know the like very specific groups? And then have you built a strategy to add value to those folks and build references and advocates in those groups? And like we have this at Procore. There were like certain CIOs who met and they were like incredibly influential. And we were like, how do we rock it with the relationship and the value to a few of these humans that everyone else respects and looks up to so that they can drive the influence for the rest of those folks?
Yeah, it's something I've thought and talked a lot about. Obviously, like at the core of everything I've done in my career is this like idea of community. And I used to beat that drum really hard. And like there are these pockets in vertical SaaS where your community is living. They're just not always as obvious as they might look in your traditional SaaS, right? That has like Pavilion and has like all these groups where you're like, okay, well, we just need to go do those. It's like these people could meet at a Denny's on like every Tuesday, and those people are going to be like the most influential people on planet Earth. And then I used to get a lot of pushback of like, oh, there is no community for X buyer, that's very niche in some vertical. And A, I don't think that's ever true, but B, if that is true, what an incredible opportunity for you to be that community, like spend time, resources to figure out how you can bring those people together. And you can do that under your brand.
100%. Yeah. And I think you all have actually done this in, the go-to-market community is you have created like a deep, truly trusted network of folks who are like, we're so grateful to get to be around each other. So I do agree with you. Sometimes that community isn't there and you have to make it, but that's where marketing is just so powerful, right? It's like, as soon as you can identify that and you can still agree that's an important part of winning the vertical, then you can go do that. I love that. That's a good call out.
Totally. The last pillar there that I would love to just double click on is this idea of building to be multi-product before you're multi-product. What does that look like in reality? Is that just planting seeds when you're having customer conversations? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, I think ultimately it looks like you get really, really good at product innovation because you do have to have, a second and really a third act, for Procore. And look, I can't take any credit for Procore in general, but I especially can't take any credit for this one. But I think Tui and, Sam Krugman, who was Procore CTO, and Brandon Terry, who was running product at the time, like they were incredible about being like, okay, there is a ton of value to be delivered to an incredibly important part of the construction lifecycle through kind of project management. So like docs, drawings, like those kinds of things. However, there's another control point that is exceptionally important where we can build a category creating product, and that is kind of financial management, right? So that's like, budget, change orders, all these, things that happen around money in construction. And we were really mindful that like we were going to need to build that and we were going to need that to continue driving growth. And so I think it's both. It's, staying really close to your customer, understanding voice of customer, voice of market, vision selling and having a story that you can tell about being their partner throughout their whole life cycle of workflows and things they do. But at some point, you actually have to have the goods on the product side. And I think just starting out the gate with that understanding, right? Which we were really fortunate to have, right? Like, again, zero credit to me, but like Procore CEO is like, to say he's a genius would not be fair to him. He is just like a magical human, both on product and leadership. And I think that was our intent. And then really thinking through how that even enables, if you follow McKinsey's like Horizon 1, 2, 3 kind of growth literature, like a Horizon 3 bet, which for us was fintech, right? And so you see this in, I think, most vertical SaaS, which is like, hey, how are we going to win in something like payments? which is sticky, it's high margin, it's really valuable, right? And so we had that as additional next level of growth after winning this financial management category, which integrates into your ERP, which drives forward how money moves around your organization. It's really important. Does that answer your question?
It does. It does. And if we had more time, I would spend another hour on your best practices for how you actually introduce the new functionality to the customer base and cross sell, upsell. But that will be another hour. We'll have you on in the future. As we wrap up, I do have one final question for you, and I always keep this one the same, and usually generates some spicy takes. The question is, what is one widely held belief that revenue leaders believe to be true today that you think is bullshit or no longer serving us?
So, I think how you hire, and in particular, the over rotation, I would say, towards domain expertise or towards someone having been at a specific company, I think is misguided. And so I think a lot of times you get someone saying, hey, I sell data warehousing technology, so I'm going to go hire out of like Teradata or Snowflake, right? And, Snowflake has such a halo on it for so many great reasons that like, I just need to get someone out of Snowflake. And I think in practice, what I'm seeing is that like, if you hire instead for someone who has reported into a decision maker, who was one of those Price's Law folks, even if they weren't at Snowflake, you'll be far more successful. And, I think like I've kind of had this hypothesis for a while. It's bore out for me in a couple companies I'm advising where they're like, hey, like we really wanted to hire this domain expertise and we wanted this thing and it didn't work out. And now they're hiring just someone who's a gifted leader, who's got a growth mindset, who's able to lead at scale. And truthfully, I think ICONIQ Analytics has actually put out like really rad thought leadership on this these days. They call it their scale to ARR ratio or multiple. And the concept there is like hire someone who's been a part of massive scale and has owned a large part of the business. And let's just say it's a 10x scale to ARR ratio. So if you're running, $100 million business, hire someone who's managed $1 billion book. And I have found that to be a far better way to hire than, this widely held belief of like, I need to hire someone who like understands my domain, my customer, build on even more. Like, I just don't believe you find the people very often where they're like, I have a Rolodex and I'm going to just make you rich by bringing all the people I know because I've sold to all these people. So said simply, like, I think hiring for someone who's reported to a decision maker and has seen that scale to ARR multiple is a better belief system for hiring than hiring domain experience and hiring from that hot company.
Yeah. I've never heard it put that way, but it does make total sense. And I'll say from experience, I have seen a lot of people from insert hot company not go quite as planned. So I think I'll make sure that we link out to the ICONIQ Analytics one that you're referring to as a helpful resource in the show notes. But man, Dennis, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Really, really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you go and have time for a little bit of nap, but you probably put too much caffeine in your body now to have a nap, hey?
Well, and I get a lot of excitement and energy from talking to someone like you. So it has been such a pleasure and an honor. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, man. And for any folks, we probably have a lot of vertical founders, revenue leaders that are like, how do I continue to follow along with this guy? LinkedIn, Twitter, what's kind of your poison?
Go to market podcast. Yeah. I don't know, everywhere. I think I'm just, it's been, I don't know, to be honest. I'm early in this journey of like putting myself out there. So yeah, I should have a better answer than that.
I love it,
work on that. Note to self, get better at that question.
Perfect. Well, excited to know you, excited to get to work with you, and I'm pumped for this new journey where you're sharing more of your thoughts. So thank you. And to all of our listeners, I say it every week, listening is one thing, executing's something totally different. Hopefully we gave you some ideas and strategies and things to think about, and we'll see you all next week.